Vivid verses.
I signed my name 11 times before I understood what any of it meant. That's not an exaggeration or a trick of memory. I counted afterward, going back through the folder I kept in the bottom drawer of my desk, the one with the tab labeled nothing, because a label would have been a confession. 11 signatures. Some on documents that mattered. Most on documents that didn't, or that only mattered in the way a hallway matters. You have to walk through it to get to the room you actually want. The first one was on a Tuesday. Dana's father, Walt, called it a formality, which is a word people use when they want you to stop listening before you've finished hearing the sentence. We were at their kitchen table, the one with the burn mark near the edge that nobody had ever bothered to sand out, and Walt had a folder in front of him that he slid across like it was a menu. "The bank wants a co-signer," he said. "Standard stuff. You're not on the hook for anything. It's just they like to see his second name. Makes them feel better." Dana was next to me, her hand on my knee under the table, which I understood to mean please. Her mother, Carol, was refilling coffee that nobody had asked her to refill, which I understood to mean don't make this a thing. Her brother Miles was in the doorway with his arms crossed, not sitting, which I understood to mean he didn't want to be associated with whatever happened next, one way or the other. I read the document. Not skimmed read. Walt watched me do it with the patient irritation of a man watching someone check a stove he already knows is off. "It says I'm guaranteeing repayment," I said. "That's boilerplate. Every loan document says that. It's not going to come to that. But it says it. It says it." Walt agreed, in the tone of a man agreeing to something meaningless. I looked at Dana. She wasn't looking at the document. She was looking at me, and there was something in her face I'd later spend a lot of time trying to name. Not pressure, exactly. More like a hell breath. Like she needed this to go a certain way and didn't want to be the one who asked for it directly. "What's the ownership structure?" I said. "If I'm guaranteeing the loan, what's my position in the business?" Walt laughed, not unkindly. "You're not. This is an investment, son. You're not buying in. You're just helping us get past the bank's paperwork. So I have no stake. We take care of you," Carol said from the counter, not turning around. "Obviously, if you're putting your name on something, we're not going to let you carry something for nothing." "Right, Walt." "Right," Walt said. "We'll figure out the details. This is family." I want to be honest about what I felt in that moment, because the version of this story where I felt a chill of foreboding and pushed back accordingly is not true, and I don't want to pretend to a foresight I didn't have. What I felt was smaller than that. It was the feeling of a sentence that doesn't finish. "We take care of you." Care of you how? "We'll figure out the details, figure out when." Not suspicion, just an ear for incompleteness. The same ear that makes you notice when someone gives you directions and skips the part about which exit to take. I signed. Dana's hand relaxed on my knee. Miles left the doorway without saying anything. Carol put a mug of coffee in front of me that I didn't ask for and didn't drink. That night, in my car in their driveway before I pulled out, I opened the Notes app on my phone and wrote, "Signed loan cosigner doc, June 14th. Walt said, "Not an investment," said, "We'll take care of you," said, "Figure out the details." No numbers given. No stake offered in writing. I didn't know yet that this would become a habit. I told myself I was just being careful, the way you're careful with anything that has your name on it. That was true. It just wasn't the whole truth. The second signature came about 3 weeks later, and it wasn't really a signature so much as an initial on a form authorizing me as a secondary contact for the business's line of credit. Miles handed it to me at his parents' house, at a dinner where the topic of the loan hadn't come up once until dessert, when it arrived sideways, disguised as a joke. "You're basically an investor now," Miles said, grinning, cutting into a pie Carol had made. "Silent partner." "Silent partner in what?" I said. "The business. You're on the paperwork now. That makes you, I don't know, an honorary Hargrove." He laughed at his own joke. Dana laughed too, a beat late, watching me. What would that mean practically? I said. If something happened to the business, what's my exposure versus what's my? Nothing's going to happen to the business, Walt said, not sharply, just closing the subject the way you'd close a window against a draft. It's doing fine. Miles is being dramatic. I'm not being dramatic. I'm saying he's basically family now. He's always been family, Carol said. And this was true in the sense that it was said with real warmth, and also true in the sense that it answered a question I hadn't asked in order to avoid the one I had. I initialed the form. That night, Miles called me silent partner, said basically an investor. Walt shut down follow-up question about exposure versus business health. No stake discussed again. No numbers. I don't think I decided on any single night to start building a file. It accumulated the way debris accumulates on a windowsill. You don't choose each piece, you just notice, eventually, that there's a pattern to what keeps landing there. Every conversation about the business circled the same territory. Vague warmth, deferred specifics, a promise shaped like a promise but hollow where the terms should be. And every time, I wrote it down, dated in my own words immediately afterward. Not because I thought I'd need it, because writing it down was the only way I could be sure I hadn't imagined the shape of it. Dana and I had been engaged 4 months by then. We'd set a date for the following spring. Nothing formal yet, no venue booked, but a date, a real one, the kind you say out loud to people. Her family's business, a mid-sized supplier operation Walt had built over 2 decades, the kind of business that employed people you'd recognize from around town, but wasn't big enough to survive being run badly, had been struggling for over a year before I ever heard about it. I only learned the scale of it by pieces, the way you learn the depth of a lake by watching how far down someone has to dive before they stop being visible. Dana told me some of it, not because she was hiding it, I think, but because she didn't fully understand it herself, and translating her father's optimism into actual numbers wasn't something she'd been trained to do. She'd say things like, "Dad thinks Q3 will turn around," and I'd ask what specifically was supposed to turn around, and she wouldn't know because Walt hadn't told her, because Walt operated on faith the way other men operated on spreadsheets. I went to 2 meetings with the bank at Walt's invitation, sitting in as what he called moral support, though I understood by the second meeting that my presence was doing something more specific than that. It was reassurance, a second warm body the loan officer could look at and think, there are 2 people standing behind this. I didn't say much in those meetings. I listened. I watched the loan officer's face when Walt talked about projected growth, and I watched Walt's face when the loan officer asked about the previous quarter's numbers, and I wrote down what I'd watch when I got home. At the second meeting, the loan officer, a tired, precise woman named Reyes who clearly had done this dance with small business owners 100 times, turned to me directly and said, "And you're comfortable with your position here? You understand the terms of the guarantee." "I understand the terms of the guarantee," I said. "I'm still working out what my position is." She looked at me a beat longer than the question required. Walt jumped in with something smooth about how we were still finalizing internal arrangements, family stuff, nothing that would affect the bank's paperwork. Reyes nodded and moved on. But she looked at me first before Walt spoke, and I understood that she'd noticed the same incompleteness I had. It wasn't validation exactly. It didn't need to be. It was just a data point. Someone whose job was to notice exposure had noticed something worth a second look. That night, Reyes asked directly if I understood my position. I said I was still working out what it was. Walt answered for me. Internal arrangements. Reyes noted it, moved on. She saw it too. By the 6th month, the pattern had a name in my head, though I never said the name out loud to anyone, not even to myself in so many words. The name was, I am being prepared. Not prepared for a role. Prepared as a container. Every conversation added weight to my name on the paperwork without ever adding definition to what my name on the paperwork actually bought me. I had no equity agreement. No documented repayment terms beyond the original loan structure, which named the business as primary and me as guarantor, full stop. No side letter, no verbal turned written promise. Nothing that Carol's will take care of you had ever become except more of the same sentence, repeated at different dinners, always trailing off into the specific silence where a number should have been. I want to be precise about what I did during this period because it would be easy to make it sound more dramatic than it was, and drama was never the register I operated in. I did not investigate anyone. I did not hire a lawyer. Not yet. I did not confront Walt or Carol or Miles about what I suspected they were doing, largely because I wasn't fully sure they were doing anything at all in the sense of conscious plan. I think, and this is the part that took me the longest to sit with, I think Walt believed every word he said to me. I think he believed the business would recover. I think "we'll take care of you" felt true to him in the moment he said it, the way a man standing on a bridge he built with his own hands believes it will hold, right up until the moment it doesn't. What I did was smaller and less satisfying than an investigation. I kept a folder. I dated every conversation. I noted who was present, what was said, what was implied, and this was the part that mattered most, what was never actually written down or specified. I saved every email, even the ones that seemed irrelevant, the way you save receipts for things you don't expect to need receipts for, out of a kind of institutional caution rather than any specific fear. I also did one other thing, and this is the thing I've thought about most since because it's the only thing in the whole sequence that could be called an action rather than an observation. About 5 months in, I asked my own attorney, an old college friend named Priya, who did contract work, not litigation, but who understood documents the way I understood machinery, to review the original loan guarantee. Not to fight it, just to understand, in exact terms, what it obligated me to and what it didn't. I told no one I'd done this. I paid her out of a separate account, in cash for the initial consult. Not because I thought I was doing anything wrong, but because I understood, on some pre-verbal level, that the value of this information depended entirely on nobody knowing I had it. "You're a guarantor on the loan," Priya told me, over coffee, going through it line by line. "That's real. If the business defaults and the bank comes after the debt, they can come after you up to the guarantee amount. That part's not ambiguous. And the ownership stake I've been told about verbally is nothing. Legally, you have zero interest in this business. None. You have liability without benefit, which is," she looked up at me, "which is not usually how people structure things unless they don't expect you to ask. So if the business fails, I owe the bank money for a company I have no stake in." "Correct. Unless something's been drafted that I haven't seen." "Nothing's been drafted. Then that's your exposure. All downside, no upside on paper." She slid the document back to me. "Has anyone put anything in writing about compensating you? An indemnification agreement, a side letter, anything?" "No." "Then verbally promising to take care of you means nothing if this goes sideways. You understand that?" "I understand that." She studied me for a second. "You don't seem surprised." "I'm not," I said, and I wasn't, and that was the moment I understood that the folder in my drawer wasn't caution anymore. It was preparation for a fact I already believed was coming. The business began to fail publicly, not just in the internal numbers Dana half understood, but visibly in ways that reached the people around us. In the 8th month, a key supplier contract wasn't renewed. 2 employees I recognized from Sunday dinners over the years stopped showing up in Walt's stories about the office. Miles, who worked in the business in some capacity nobody had ever fully explained to me, started answering questions about how things were going with a kind of practiced vagueness that mirrored his father's, except performed less convincingly, because Miles had never been as good a liar as Walt, mostly because Miles didn't yet understand that he was lying. Dana, and I, during this same stretch, started to come apart in a way that had nothing to do with the business and everything to do with it. It wasn't a fight. There was no single incident. It was more like watching a rope fray. You can point to no exact moment where it broke, only a long, visible thinning. She grew distant in the specific way people grow distant when they're carrying something they haven't named yet, even to themselves. She'd cancel plans and not offer much of a reason. She started spending more time at her parents' house, which I understood. It was her family, and they were in crisis, and that pull made sense to me even as it hollowed out the space where we used to be. I never asked her, during this period, to clarify what was happening between us. This wasn't stoicism for its own sake. It was that I could see, with the same flat clarity I'd been applying to the loan documents, that asking her to explain a feeling she hadn't yet let herself name would only push her to defend a position before she'd actually taken it. So I waited. I kept showing up to the dinners I was still invited to. I kept my folder. I said nothing. At one of those dinners, near the end of the 8th month, Carol brought up the wedding for the first time in weeks, in a tone that didn't match the words. "We should really talk about a venue soon," she said, spooning rice onto a plate. "Spring comes fast." Nobody responded right away. Walt was looking at his own plate. Dana was looking at her water glass. Miles had his phone out, which he almost never did at the table, which meant he wanted somewhere else to look. "Yeah," Dana said finally. "We should." We didn't. Nobody brought it up again after that night. I noticed the specific quality of the silence that replaced it. Not an argument, not a decision, just an absence, the kind that tells you a decision has already been made somewhere you weren't invited into. That night, what he mentioned once, briefly, then dropped. Nobody followed up after. Dana didn't raise it again. No conversation, just absence. The closing of ranks, when it came, didn't announce itself as a strategy. It presented as grief. I want to give the family that much because I think it's true, and because giving people the benefit of their own self-deception is not the same as giving them the benefit of the doubt about what they were doing to me. Walt stopped inviting me to bank meetings. When I asked Dana about it, she said, with a kind of exhausted flatness, he said it's a family thing right now. He doesn't want outside opinions muddying it. I noted the phrase, outside opinions, because 6 months earlier, my presence at those meetings had been solicited specifically as reassurance. And now, at the point where the numbers had turned genuinely bad, I had become, in the space of one sentence, an outsider. Miles called me once during this period, late, clearly having had a few drinks, and said something that I wrote down verbatim as soon as I hung up, because it was the first time anyone in the family had said anything close to the truth out loud. "Look," he said, "I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying, if this goes bad, and I'm not saying it will, but if it does, you're the one whose name is actually on it. Not mine. Not Dad's. Not really. He restructured his personal stuff years ago. Don't ask me how. That's above my pay grade. But yours. You're the guy the bank calls." "I'm aware I'm a guarantor," I said. "Yeah, well, I don't know. I felt like somebody should say it plainly at least once. Everyone else keeps talking around it. Why are you telling me this, Miles?" There was a pause, and when he answered, his voice had lost some of the looseness. "Because it's not right, man. What's happening? I don't know what to do about it. I don't have any power in this family. I never have, but I didn't want to be someone who watched it happen and never said a word." "I appreciate that," I said, and I meant it more than he probably understood. That night, Miles called drunk, said outright, "I'm the one whose name is actually on it." Said Walt restructured his personal stuff years ago. Protected himself. Miles said it's not right. First person in family to state it plainly. I didn't share this call with Dana. I didn't share any of my folder with anyone. This wasn't strategy in the sense of a chess player withholding a move, or if it was, I didn't experience it that way at the time. It felt more like a kind of respect for the facts. The facts were still assembling themselves. I didn't yet know the shape of the final ask, and until I did, there was nothing productive to do with what I had except keep it intact and keep it true. The ask, when it came, arrived exactly the way I'd expect an ask like that to arrive in a family like this one. Dressed as a conversation about the future, held in the kitchen, at the same table with the same burn mark, for days after Miles's call. Walt looked older than he had 8 months earlier. That wasn't performance. The business had genuinely aged him, and I felt something for him in that moment that had nothing to do with what I suspected was coming, some old, uncomplicated fondness that the rest of the evening didn't manage to erase, even afterward. "I want to be straight with you," Walt said. "The business isn't going to make it. I've been fighting it for months, but I have to be honest with myself now. We're looking at default on the loan within the quarter, maybe sooner." I said nothing. I'd learned, over 8 months, exactly how much silence a man like Walt needed before he'd fill it himself with the actual content of what he wanted. "The bank's going to come after the guarantee," he continued. "That's you. I know that's not what you signed up for. I mean, obviously, in a sense you did. You signed the guarantee, but I don't think either of us thought it would really come to this." "What are you asking me, Walt?" He exhaled. Carol, at the counter, had gone very still, which told me she already knew what he was about to say, that this had been discussed and rehearsed without me, which I already understood, but seeing it confirmed in the stillness of her back was different from suspecting it. "I'm asking you to understand that when the bank calls the guarantee, it's going to be on you. And I know that's a huge thing to ask, but you're about to be family, really family, and Dana and I, we've talked about it, and we think the fair thing, the family thing, is for you to absorb this. We can't. I've got nothing left to give them. Miles has got nothing. If it falls on us, it takes the house. It takes everything, and Carol and I are past the age where we can rebuild that. You're young. You've got time. You got a career. It wouldn't ruin you the way it would ruin us." There it was. Not dressed as theft. Dressed as fairness. A calculation of relative resilience, offered with what I believe was genuine, if self-serving, sincerity. I understood, hearing it, that this was the sentence 8 months of vague reassurance had been walking toward the entire time. "We'll take care of you" had never meant "we will protect you." It had meant "we will decide, later, that you are the one who can afford to be unprotected." "What about Dana?" I said. "What does she think?" Everyone looked at the table. Dana wasn't even there. I hadn't registered it until that exact moment. How strange it was that this conversation about my future, my exposure, my money, was happening without her in the room, and that no one had thought to mention her absence until I asked. "She agrees it's the fairest option," Walt said. "Given the circumstances." "Given what circumstances?" Carol, turn around now. "Given that things have been strained. Between you two. I think everyone feels it would be easier for her to know this was settled, one way or the other, before decisions get made about the wedding." I understood, in that sentence, the full architecture of what had been built without me. The engagement wasn't stalling because of drift. It had been placed on hold deliberately as leverage, not cruelly, maybe not even consciously, but structurally. My future with Dana had become contingent on whether I agreed to absorb a debt that had never been mine to begin with, and the ambiguity of "we'll figure it out" that Walt offered 8 months earlier had finally resolved into its actual shape. I was never being invited into the family's fortune. I was being fitted, slowly and without any single dishonest moment I could point to, for the family's loss. I did not raise my voice. I did not tell Walt what I thought of the offer, or the framing, or the absence of his daughter from a conversation about her own engagement. I looked at him and at Carol for a long moment, and I said only, "I'll think about it." Walt's shoulders dropped with something like relief, which told me he had expected worse. Anger, maybe, or an immediate refusal, something with edges he could push against. My flatness confused him more than resistance would have. I could see that. I let him sit in the confusion. That night, In my car, I didn't write anything down right away. I sat for a long time before I did. When I finally opened the Notes app, what I wrote was shorter than my usual entries. Walt asked me to absorb the guarantee, framed as fairness. Confirmed engagement stall was leverage, not drift. Dana, not present for the ask. Time to call Priya again. I called Priya the next morning, and this time I didn't ask her for a review. I asked her a direct question. If the bank calls the guarantee, I said, and the family attempts to formalize some kind of agreement where I take on the debt in exchange for anything, the ownership stake they've talked about, anything, what happens if I say no? Legally, nothing happens to you if you say no to a new agreement. The original guarantee stands on its own terms. You're liable up to what you actually signed, which we already reviewed. Nobody can force you to sign something new. The only danger, she said, is if you've said or done anything that could be construed as agreeing to something informally. An email, a verbal commitment on record, anything a lawyer could later argue was a modification of the original terms. I haven't. Then you have no additional exposure beyond exactly what the original guarantee says, which is bad, but it's finite and it's known. It's not the same as owning a failing business. What if they try to argue I have an ownership stake, that I owe more because I was, in effect, a partner? Priya was quiet for a second. Do you have anything in writing that suggests you're a partner? No, nothing was ever put in writing. Then legally, you're not one. A partner has documented equity. You have a guarantee on a loan and a lot of dinner table conversations that were never formalized. Those conversations don't create an ownership interest, no matter how many times someone said the words, "we'll take care of you." If anything, she added, the absence of documentation protects you here. If they'd actually given you the stake they talked about, you'd share more of the downside. Because they never did, you only carry exactly what you signed. Nothing more. I sat with that for a long moment on the phone, and something in my chest that had been braced for 8 months finally, quietly released. Send me everything you have, Priya said. Every note, every email, every date. If this goes anywhere formal, I want the full record, not just the loan document. I sent her the folder that afternoon. 11 months of dated entries, screenshots of texts, copies of emails, my own contemporaneous notes on conversations that had never been written down by anyone else because no one else had thought to. The formal moment came 5 weeks later, in an office that belonged to the family's own lawyer, a soft-spoken older man named Denholm, who I'd met exactly once before at Dana's parents' anniversary party, where he'd struck me as pleasant and entirely unmemorable. He was neither of those things in this room. Walt was there. Carol was there. Dana was there, for the first time in this entire sequence, actually present for a conversation about her own future, sitting slightly apart from her parents in a way that told me something had shifted in her too, though I didn't yet know what. Miles wasn't there, which I noted and understood. Denholm had a document in front of him, a proposed agreement drafted by his office, formalizing what Walt had floated at the kitchen table 5 weeks earlier. I could see the shape of it from across the table before he even explained it. An assumption of the guarantee obligation by me, in exchange for a nominal, backdated ownership interest in the business, structured in a way that I understood immediately from Priya's coaching, would have created the appearance that I'd always had a stake, and therefore always had exposure commensurate with one. We wanted to formalize things properly, Denholm said, sliding the document toward me the way Walt had slid a folder across a different table 11 months earlier. Given the loan situation, we think it's important that everyone's position is clearly documented, in writing, going forward. In writing, I said. Now, it's important these things are clear, Denholm said, missing or choosing to miss what I meant. I didn't reach for the document. I looked at Walt. For 11 months, I said, I asked more than once what my ownership position was if I signed the guarantee. I was told, verbally on multiple occasions, that I'd be taken care of, I was never given anything in writing. Not once. Not a term sheet. Not a side letter. Not an email confirming a percentage. Nothing. I'll let that sit. Now, the moment the business is failing and the bank is going to call the loan, there's suddenly a formal document ready, backdating an ownership stake I was never actually given at the exact moment that stake would make me responsible for more than the guarantee alone requires. Denholm's expression didn't change much, but something in the room did. Carol looked at Walt. Walt looked at the table. "We're trying to do this the right way," Walt said, and his voice had lost the warm confidence of the kitchen table entirely. We assumed you understood the stake was implied, that it was coming, we just hadn't gotten to the paperwork yet. I asked for the paperwork 11 months ago," I said. "I have the date. I have what you said in response. I've had 11 months during which any one of you could have put a single sentence in writing, and no one did. Not because you forgot, because an ownership stake with a paper trail would have entitled me to something. An ownership stake offered only verbally, only now, only at the moment the debt comes due. That doesn't entitle me to anything. That obligates me to something. Those aren't the same offer. They never were." Denholm cleared his throat. "The guarantee stands regardless of this agreement. That obligation exists independent of any ownership discussion." "I'm aware," I said. "I've known the exact terms of that guarantee since roughly a month after I signed it. I know precisely what I'm liable for and precisely what I'm not. What I won't do is sign a document today that retroactively assigns me a role I was never given in order to expand an exposure that was already fixed and already known." I looked at the document without touching it. "I'm not signing this." The room was quiet in a way that felt different from every other silence I'd cataloged over the past 11 months. This wasn't the silence of something being withheld. It was the silence of people recalculating in real time whether the thing they'd assumed was inevitable actually was. "You'll still owe the guarantee amount," Denholm said, more carefully now. "Refusing this doesn't change that." "I know exactly what I owe," I said. "I've known for a long time. What I won't do is agree to owe more than that, dressed up as fairness, at the one moment it happens to be convenient for everyone at this table except me." Carol spoke for the first time. "We never meant for it to feel like we really did intend to take care of you. We just didn't. Things moved fast, and then things got bad, and I believe you meant it in the moment you said it." I said, and I did believe that about Carol at least, and saying it cost me nothing because it was true. That doesn't change what actually happened, which is that a promise that's never written down isn't a promise. It's a hope. I hoped it would work out for all of us too. It didn't. That's not the same as it being unfair for me to only owe exactly what I signed. Dana hadn't said anything the entire meeting. When I finally looked at her, she wasn't looking at her parents. She was looking at me, and there was something in her face that had been missing for months. Not relief, not quite, but a kind of recognition, as if she was seeing an outline that had always been there and only now resolved into a shape she could name. Denholm gathered the papers slowly. "I'll need to discuss this with my clients," he said, which was a formality of its own. A sentence that meant nothing was actually left to discuss. The meeting ended without anyone raising their voice. That, more than anything, is what I remember most clearly about it. How quiet the whole unraveling was, how little drama the actual mechanism of the thing required once it was finally exposed to light. Walt shook my hand on the way out of some deep habit of manners that outlasted the situation that should have made the gesture impossible. And I shook his back because I understood by then that whatever he'd done it without ever fully admitting to himself what it was. Dana walked me to my car. "I didn't know," she said, "about the timing, about them wanting to wait on the wedding until you'd agreed to something. I found out 2 days ago. I should have known sooner. I should have asked more questions. You were trying to hold your family together," I said. "I understand that. That's not an excuse. No, I said, it isn't. But it's an explanation, and those aren't nothing. I opened my car door, then stopped. I kept records for almost a year. Every conversation, every promise, every time someone said something and never wrote it down. I didn't tell you because I didn't know what I was building it for until today. She was quiet for a moment. Are you angry with me? No, I said. And it was true in the specific way that most things I'd said over the past 11 months have been true, carefully, without excess, without more weight than the moment could actually bear. I don't think anger would have gotten either of us anything useful. I think what I needed was to know exactly what I actually owed and to whom before anyone else decided that for me. And now you know. Now I know, I said. I didn't ask her what came next for us. I understood, standing in that parking lot, that the answer to that question wasn't going to arrive that day, and that trying to force it into the same conversation as the loan would only confuse two things that deserved to be considered separately. She didn't ask me either. We stood there for a moment longer than the conversation strictly required, the way people do when neither one is sure whether they're closing something or just pausing it. I'll call you, she said, finally. Okay, I said. I got in my car and drove home, and that night, for the first time in 11 months, I opened the Notes app and didn't write anything at all. There was nothing left that needed to be dated or recorded or kept safe against a future that might try to rewrite it. The guarantee still existed. I still owed exactly what I'd signed for, no more, no less, and no one at that table had managed to make it any larger than the words on the original page. Everything else, the stake I was never given, the promises never written down, the loss they'd hoped I'd absorb, belong now to the people who'd never bothered to put it on paper. I closed the drawer where the folder had lived for almost a year, and for the first time since the burn mark table and the sliding folder and the word formality, I didn't feel the need to keep anything in reserve.
Thanks for listening.